My name is Robert Baer. For more than 20 years, I worked as an undercover agent for the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, in some of the Middle East's most dangerous countries. On the 7th of July, 2005, London was the first European city to face a new form of terror, the homegrown suicide bomber. In a series of attacks, 4 suicide bombers, all British citizens, killed 52 people. For the British, the bombers came from nowhere. But suicide bombing is not new. 25 years ago, I was stationed in the Middle East when suicide bombers killed 380 Westerners. The Beirut bombings were the worst terrorist attacks until 9/11. I lost several colleagues in those explosions, and although I've now left the CIA, at the time, I vowed to make it my life's mission to find out who did it and why and where the cult of suicide bombing started. Tehran, the capital of Iran, home to 70 million Muslims. When I was last here more than 25 years ago, Iran was one of the United States' greatest allies in the region. Now it is one of our greatest enemies. If you want to understand what is going on in Iran, the best place to start is noon prayers at Tehran University. Every Friday, more than 10,000 worshipers gather to hear the regime's latest thinking. The day before I arrived, there were reports that an American guard at Guantanamo Bay had desecrated the Quran. It was not a good time for an American, and especially a former CIA agent, to be in Iran. The American government has accused Iran of being a state sponsor of terrorism and of trying to develop nuclear weapons. Iran is also the birthplace of the suicide bomber. Of you are ready to die for Iran and Islam? How many here?
You know, when it comes to the issue of Quran, we are not joking about dying for that. He says until the last drop of our blood, we will defend Quran.
In modern Iran, politics has always been dominated by a revolutionary faith. In 1979, a popular uprising against the Western-backed Shah was transformed into a religious revolution by one man, Ayatollah Khomeini. A year later, Iran was thrown into more chaos when it was invaded by its neighbor Iraq. Khomeini called for a holy war and promised a place in paradise to anyone who was martyred defending the revolution. Khomeini's power base was here in Qom. one of Iran's holiest cities. I have been granted an audience with someone who knew Khomeini well, the Grand Ayatollah Sana'i.
During the time of Imam Khomeini and the war with Iraq, the Iranian people welcomed the idea of martyrdom because the Imam's leadership was very wise and thoughtful. The people realized he wasn't doing these things on a whim. He was doing it for Islam and for the country. So his decision was accepted and martyrdom was greatly welcomed.
In calling for martyrs, Khomeini was drawing on a tradition that went back nearly 1,400 years. Shortly after its birth, Islam had split into two sects, the majority Sunni and the minority Shia. They have continually fought for dominance ever since. In 680 AD, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Imam Hussein, led his outnumbered army against the Caliph, Yazid, at the Battle of Karbala. Every year, Shia Muslims reenact this battle in a bloody passion play. Hussein's soldiers are slaughtered one by one, until finally it's his turn to die. Surrounded, he is killed, and his body is mutilated. Hussein's martyrdom is viewed by the Shia as a symbol of their struggle against tyranny and slavery, a path to salvation. Any who follow it are promised an assured place in paradise. Khomeini's trick was to reset this ancient battle in modern times, so he became the heroic Hussein. His enemy, the Iraqi leader, became the evil Yazid. And the Iranian people were Hussein's faithful soldiers, who followed him to a glorious death as shaheed, martyrs. Khomeini convinced his people that by fighting to the death against the Iraqis, they were reenacting a religious battle at the heart of their faith. I arranged to meet one of Khomeini's volunteer soldiers. When he joined up, Masoud Attar was only 12 years old.
Everybody wanted to go to the front. We were all eager to go because we wanted to experience the real thing. Getting blown up had no meaning for us. The thought that we might die didn't enter our heads. We were going in order to get killed. We had no intention of going there and coming back. We used to call out, "God is great," before going into battle, and we used to shout it out all together and at the top of our voices. The Iraqis had all the best weapons, but when they heard us shouting, "God is great," it scared the hell out of them, and they panicked and didn't know what to do. So they were defeated. As we used to say amongst ourselves, God will take care of us all.
How many friends did you lose during the war?
Many. 10, 15... More than 30. 40 of my friends. 10 to 15 were my close friends.
It's a lot. Martyrdom was a powerful rallying cry, but as a weapon of war, it was a futile instrument. In 8 years of fighting, Iran lost almost 500,000 dead. But there was one martyr who stood above all the rest. He would become the prototype for suicide bombers everywhere. Just outside Tehran is one of the largest cemeteries in the world, Beheshti-e-Zahra. Spread over more than 1,000 acres, it contains the graves of hundreds of thousands of martyrs. It is a city of the dead. Every week, thousands of Iranians come to commune with their dead relatives. This was your son?
Saeed Mustafa,
How old was he when he was martyred?
15 years old. He had just started high school. We told him to do his exams first, but he said it would be too late.
Wasn't he too young to be martyred?
He really wanted to go. He was a child. Yes, only a child. He came from school one day asking me to sign an approval letter for him to go to the front, and I did. He went for God. It was a good path for him to take, so why would we stop him? He became a martyr for God.
What does he think about martyrdom now that he lost his brother?
The martyrs are more alive than we are.
If he were asked today to become a martyr, what would his answer be?
Yes, absolutely.
So if there was another war, he would volunteer and go.
Without any doubts. Martyrdom is a path to salvation that not everybody can reach.
At the heart of the cemetery is the grave of the world's first suicide bomber, the tomb of Iran's youngest and most celebrated martyr. In 1980, the Iranian army was defending a key town in the south. At a critical moment in the battle, when the Iraqis were about to break through, 13-year-old Hussein Fahmadeh strapped explosives to his body, charged an enemy tank, and blew himself up, destroying the tank and halting the Iraqi advance. Fahmadeh became an instant hero, another martyr, lost in the defense of his country. But for me, he was different than all the others. He had deliberately killed himself. The Fahmadeh family live in a city just outside Tehran, in a house provided for them by the state. I am the first Westerner that they have ever met. The family have a room where they keep a small shrine to their son. Muhammad Hussein. Shahid Hussein. Ayatollah Khomeini here is talking about that he was a 13-year-old boy. He was just a little boy, but yet he gave himself to the military and to martyrdom. These flowers represent that he's gone to heaven. All the schools in Iran were distributing this backpack for children. There's Fahmadeh. You have the words of Ayatollah Khomeini here. Yeah, he's our guide for victory. Here's, you see a grenade and the tank. And it says on the headband, yeah, he's going to Karbala, or go to heaven in Karbala. When his parents gave Fahmadeh their blessing to join up, they never thought he would be sent to the front.
The radio news was on and my husband was listening. Suddenly it was interrupted and they announced that a 13-year-old boy had thrown himself under an enemy tank and that he had drunk the elixir of martyrdom and blown the tank up. We were having dinner and I said that this boy must be my Hussein. This act of bravery and faith was Hussein's. It must be Hussein. Nobody ate anything after that.
بدي أسأل شيء يعني شوي حساس لكن هو كان أول شهيد إذا ممكن استعمل الكلمة انتحاري مظبوط؟
No, not at all.
إيمان خالص.
Yes, he did have a very strong belief. He was a martyr. It's impossible to describe him as anything else. A martyr through and through.
It's interesting. She and the wife and the brother absolutely reject the word suicide, even though there was 100% chance that he would die. It does not come into the vocabulary. He is simply a martyr, even though it was 100% certain that he would die when he threw himself under the tank.
The word martyrdom means he understood what he was doing. Suicide implies that he did this out of desperation. Someone is desperate and they commit suicide. It was his duty. It was not for personal gain. It was for the greater good. For the people of Iran, not for himself.
Just outside Tehran is another tomb, a place of pilgrimage for all Iranians, the shrine of Ayatollah Khomeini. Every year, there's a special military rally here to give thanks for victory in the war against Iraq. At the climax of the rally, all the senior commanders of the Iranian armed forces arrived. Khomeini said that the tree of Islam can only grow if it is constantly fed with the blood of martyrs. With the example of Fahmadeh and others, he turned martyrdom into a state religion. As the rally broke up, I cornered the head of the Iranian Armed Forces, General Firuz Abadi. He has never spoken to Western reporters before. What is the importance of martyrdom for the Iranian Armed Forces today?
The Americans have realized up till now that they have to listen carefully. And they know that no army can stand in the way of martyrdom. So the Americans should know that if they try to interfere with Iran, they will dig their own graves.
Modern suicide bombing began here in Iran. Khomeini's revival of a 1400-year tradition provided the ideology of martyrdom. But Fahmadeh's heroism was still a spontaneous and isolated act. It wasn't until the cult was exported abroad that the suicide bomber became a deadly, effective weapon of war. Beirut, Lebanon's capital, a city that has always done its best to hide its past. I've been coming here for over 20 years, but it still mystifies me. It was here in the 1980s that the next stage of the suicide bomber evolved. Back then, Lebanon was struggling to come to terms with a civil war that had never really ended. In June 1982, the Israelis invaded, followed by a multinational peacekeeping force, led by the U.S. Marines. The Americans were soon drawn into the conflict and seen as Israel's ally. But nothing prepared us for what happened next. On the 18th of April, 1983, just after 1 p.m., Beirut was rocked by a massive explosion. I was lucky. I was out of town that day. Michael Harik remembers the blast. He was a 17-year-old American student in Beirut.
And there was no security here, in a sense of security like you have today.
Do you know what it was?
We had no idea what it was. The first thought was immediately sonic blasts, sonic booms, you know, like from aircraft. And then we got word that it was the American embassy that was bombed. When we got here, there was pandemonium. Basically, the whole front of the building was collapsed. You know, almost like a deck of cards. Smoke, fire, people hanging out of the buildings, dead, a torso, an arm. What sticks in your mind in my mind, was just the image of total destruction.
63 people were killed, including most of the CIA's Beirut staff. All we knew was that someone had seen a car driving into the embassy seconds before the explosion. "22 years later, the site is being redeveloped, covered up.
You know, you were there afterwards. You ever figure out who did it or come to a conclusion or?
I don't know who did it. I mean,
But there's nobody in jail or anything. It's just like their American embassy's there one day, gone the next.
I don't know, man. Part of this embassy thing was the CIA thing too, right?
Yeah, some guys got killed.
Plenty of them. Right?
Yeah.
Station chiefs. So, you know, you start to think. The people orchestrating these massive blasts, I don't think are the sporadic running around, average run-of-the-mill terrorists. I mean, they have a definite agenda.
Well, plus they're good. The bombs go off, don't they?
This is the problem. It works.
This was the first modern suicide attack against Western interests, and it caught us in the CIA by complete surprise. A few hours afterwards, an unknown group claimed responsibility, saying it was part of the Iranian Revolution's campaign against the imperialist presence. Ever since, I've been trying to find out who they really were. To understand what was happening in Lebanon, you had to get out of Beirut. But traveling outside the city was extremely dangerous. The countryside was controlled by a myriad of different factions: Phalangists, Maronite, Sunni, Shia, and Druze militias, as well as the Syrians, the Israelis, and a group of Iranians. I have come to see an old friend from the Lebanese army who remembers the chaos of the 1980s.
All these neighbors, they have a lot of interest coming to Lebanon, and to deal, each country likes to deal with some part of the people. The Israelis, they have a lot of interest coming to Lebanon. The Syrians were ready to come to Lebanon also. And at this time, the Iranians having their interest also in Lebanon, because they have a very part of Lebanon, they are Shia.
Lebanon has a large population of Shia Muslims, and in the struggle against the Israeli invaders, they looked for support from Khomeini and Iran.
It was easy for the Iranians to start coming to the Baalbek Hermel area. You have no inhabitants in this area, and you have a lot of valleys and mountains. They felt safe, and they can move and train their supporters. You can use your weapons, and nobody can hear.
I knew the Iranians were using a back road into Lebanon, over the mountains from Syria. At the time, my bosses in the CIA refused to let me investigate it. They said it was too dangerous.
This whole valley, the 70s and 80s, all the major terrorist groups had camps up here. Japanese Red Army, Abu Nidal. I mean, there was even Armenians up here. And, you know, at one point there was suspicion that European terrorist groups were operating out of here.
Today, the road is still a smuggler's route, unguarded.
The Syrians were looking for allies at the time in 1982, and the group that stood up, or the country that stood up, was Iran. And the Syrians understood that they had to set up a popular resistance, an Islamic resistance, and that's why they let the Iranians in.
So in July 1982, a special unit of volunteers from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards arrived in the historic city of Baalbek. The Iranians commandeered the Lebanese army barracks.
There's the Sheikh Abdallah barracks.
With them, they brought weapons, explosives, and from the battlefields of the Iran-Iraq War, this new idea that shahada, martyrdom, could be an incredibly potent weapon in the defense of Lebanon. The cult of the suicide bomber had arrived. The Iranians helped set up one of the most feared Islamic groups anywhere in the world, Hezbollah, the Party of God. The Bekaa Valley is still controlled by Hezbollah. You can only operate here with their permission. Just outside Baalbek, Hezbollah have erected a massive shrine to one of its founding fathers, Abbas Musawi, assassinated by the Israelis. It is a site of pilgrimage for all the Hezbollah faithful.
This is not a mosque. This is a shrine. The most important person here is Abbas Musawi. All the rest is a display of martyrs.
The shrine has become a museum to all of Hezbollah's martyrs. Case after case is filled with the personal effects of those killed in the war against the Israelis. Out of all the martyrs, there was one name that stood out.
Of course. The date on which Ahmad Kassir carried out his operation is called Hezbollah's Day of Martyrs.
It's interesting because I asked him about Ahmad Kassir, and he said that is the real day of martyrdom. That's the real day of martyrdom, when Ahmad Kassir committed suicide, and he said it had a huge effect on the Bekaa and other operations. And it affected all of Lebanon.
On the 11th of November, 1982, 18-year-old Ahmad Kassir drove a car into the Israeli military headquarters in Tyre and blew himself up. The building was completely destroyed, and 74 Israelis died in the blast. Hezbollah had transformed the Iranian concept of martyrdom into a deadly effective weapon. Ahmed Qasir was the world's first suicide car bomber. This deadly attack took place 5 months before the U.S. Embassy was bombed in Beirut. But none of us in the CIA spotted this obvious warning. Ahmed Qasir came from a small village just outside Tyre in southern Lebanon.
It's very interesting. It says in Arabic, the Prince of Martyrs, Ahmed Qasir. And here you have the symbol of Hezbollah. It says, and we are the conquerors, the Islamic Revolution in Lebanon. It's clear that Hezbollah has adopted this operation because he is really a symbol, a mythical symbol of suicide bombers.
Ahmed Qasir's family still lives in the village. I went to meet his sister and mother.
That's the martyr, Ahmad. Yes, he was the first.
No, it first happened in Iran, but he was the first in Lebanon.
When he was working in Saudi Arabia, he used to tell us that no one would shake Israel more than him. We would ask him what he was going to do. He said, wait and see. He was planning this from an early age. I feel glory and pride for him because he was the first martyr, and there were so many others who followed him.
It was a murderous contest between two unequal armies, Israel's conventional force with every form of modern weaponry at its disposal, and Hezbollah's guerrilla army with stealth and blind faith on its side. For his family in Hezbollah, Ahmed and all those that followed him were not terrorists. They were seen as ordinary soldiers. If he had dropped a bomb from a plane on the Israeli military headquarters, would we think of him any differently? The success of Ahmed Qasir's suicide attack was also a powerful recruiting tool. Thousands of young Lebanese now joined the resistance, ready to sacrifice themselves to defeat the occupying Israelis. Most of the attacks took place along Israel's border with Lebanon. It was to become a killing ground for the conscripts in the Israeli army. Today, southern Lebanon is still a dangerous place, as the war has never officially ended. It was here that Hezbollah waged a prolonged campaign of suicide bomb attacks. They provided me with a guided tour of where the attacks took place.
The sign says that 42 soldiers were killed and injured, maybe 15 killed, and the martyr, Abdullah Atwi, was approximately 24 years old. Who can min Wayne? He was from Markaba.
Fighting regularly breaks out along this border. As we walked, we were under constant surveillance by the Israelis.
This is the gate. After the liberation, the Israelis blocked it off with a wall and a fence.
This is where convoy was coming across. There were hundreds of Israeli soldiers gathered in this part the day of the suicide operation. And he came down here in a pickup truck full of explosives, and he blew himself up right in this spot. الاستشاري هيثم صبحي دبوك. مين كان؟
He was a member of the Islamic resistance. He blew himself up with the Israeli enemy on the 19th of August, 1989.
قديش كان عمره؟
He was about 20, 21. He was an engineer.
The martyr was an engineer. كان متزوج؟
No.
He was single.
There was a convoy of lorries, and in this convoy, there were about 30 Israeli soldiers.
There was mentality.
And then at the crossing point from Israel, the martyr blew himself up.
These were no random acts committed by religious madmen, but part of a well-planned campaign. As a tactic of war, it was highly efficient. One resistance fighter could kill scores of Israeli soldiers. Hezbollah had invented the ultimate smart bomb.
قولي مرة ثانية عن عملية استشهادية. يعني هذا قرار شخصي قرار حزبي.
No, it's not a personal decision. There are freedom fighters who want to carry out acts of martyrdom, but the actual decision is taken by a specific council in Hezbollah. We know that given half the chance, Israel will invade us. So the members of Hezbollah and other freedom fighters are ready. They are always ready. 24 hours a day.
The propaganda value of these attacks was enormous, and many of them were secretly filmed. Hezbollah set up its own television station, and their programs were interrupted with news of the latest attack. Today, from a secret location in South Beirut, El Manar Television repackages the same dramatic footage in specially produced videos that are circulated throughout the Middle East. For some, in a new generation of Muslims, the suicide bomber has become an immortal hero. Although suicide bombing first appeared among Lebanon Shia Muslims, I heard of another Lebanese group for whom it was just a battlefield tactic. For the members of the Syrian Socialist National Party, religion played no part. I met up with one of the party's leaders, Tawfiq Mahana.
How many martyrs have you had in the party?
We have 13.
13. I mean, what goes through their heads? What I don't understand is, if you're a Muslim or a Christian who believes in the afterlife of heaven, and you want to commit martyrdom, you're promising me a future, what you believe in or you don't believe in. What do you promise these people for eternity? I mean, this is very strange, you understand, for me to understand.
The Muslim, for example, who goes through this kind of sacrifice, is promised by paradise. Our comrades are not promised by a paradise in heaven. Their paradise is on earth. Their country is their paradise.
علمتني وخلتني آمن بأن نمارس البطولة ما نخاف الحرب بل نخاف الفشل.
For members of the SSNP, it was a purely political struggle. Each bomber would record a video will explaining why they were about to sacrifice their lives against the Israeli invader. Being a secular party, there was no ban on the use of women. Half of the SSNP martyrs were female, including the world's first female suicide bomber, 17-year-old Sanaa Muhaidli.
وضحيت
I ask all my family and all those close to me to carry on along my path of sacrifice until the complete liberation of our land. I want you to rejoice for me, because my soul is going home. I am giving myself for the honor of my people. So I hope that you are not sad, for this is my wedding day.
On the 9th of April 1985, Sanaa drove a car into an Israeli patrol and blew herself up, killing 2 soldiers. She became known as the Bride of the South. The party arranged for me to meet a veteran commander. He's still nervous about talking, as for years he was hunted by the Israelis.
There's no one listening in on us, is there? When we're talking.
Munir al-Jamali personally organized the attack of another female suicide bomber, Norma Abi Hassan.
One day she came to me and said, "Munir, I want to carry out an operation against Israel." I said, "It's wrong that you go and die. It's wrong." She said, "It's what I want. My mother is no good. My father drinks and smokes. He's no good." She had lived with the party for 6 months. She had seen people dying, people going on acts of martyrdom. So she said that she now wanted to go on an operation herself. No one pressurized her.
On the 17th of July, 1986, Norma drove a car into an Israeli army base and blew herself up, killing 10 Israeli soldiers. She was 26 years old.
Norma was beautiful. She gave me this picture before she committed her act of martyrdom. On the back, she wrote me a message that said, "I am going now."
Ila Rafiq Mir Hamali, Norma Abi Hassan, Zalba Norma. Hello.
She was a really good person, a real gem.
The Lebanese resistance waged an 18-year campaign against the Israeli army, with over 30 suicide bomb attacks in which more than 350 soldiers were killed. In the end, southern Lebanon had become Israel's Vietnam. In the year 2000, the Israelis finally withdrew. The Lebanese were left with a heroic story that is forever commemorated in the hills of southern Lebanon. In the grounds of the new American embassy, on a hill overlooking Beirut, there is a different memorial. This one is to the victims. 18th of April, 1983. 63 killed in the American embassy. 20th of September, 1984. The embassy was bombed again, with 11 killed. But by far the biggest attack came on the 23rd of October, 1983. When a suicide bomber drove through the entrance of the U.S. Marines barracks just outside Beirut. He detonated 12,000 pounds of explosives in the biggest non-nuclear explosion since the Second World War. 241 U.S. servicemen were killed. A Marine cameraman recorded these scenes. The worst terrorist attack against the United States until 9/11. This is the first time his film has been shown. Today, the site is a car park at Beirut Airport. "22 years later, the identities of the bombers are still unclear.
In the army, we have a department.
One person who might know the truth is the officer in charge of the original investigation.
Military and civil around the military. The operation of the American embassy, it was the first one in Lebanon, very sophisticated and perfectly studied, and with high-level people operating.
So it was more than just a gang.
Yes.
For me, it's a little bit strange because you already had the Israeli bombing in November 1982, and they named the boy who drove the truck into the Israeli headquarters. Don't you think it's strange that in that atmosphere they haven't named the person in the truck?
Because it's very strange. Normally, when you make operation, you have to declare who, the responsibility, who did it, etc., and to celebrate the heroes of the operation. But during this period, it was like secret. Nobody declared.
And it's still a secret.
Nobody declared responsibility. Nobody declared names. Nobody. Why? I don't know. I believe the aim is not to let know which country was behind. It's a question of countries. It's not.
A country did it.
It's not a question of people or groups or.
It's a country did the Marine bombings and the.
I didn't say so. You are saying this.
I mean, that's a good explanation. It was a country that did it, and the country does not want to be named or indicted. Very simple.
This is
it's logical.
This is a normal logic.
Normal logic. But you won't tell me.
I don't have the right.
Shortly before I resigned from the CIA, I discovered a damning piece of evidence as to who that country could be. 13 months before the first suicide bomb against the U.S. Embassy, a top-level CIA source had produced a detailed report saying that Iran was in touch with a network capable of destroying the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. I am convinced that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been engaged in a secret war with the United States since 1979, and in Lebanon, one of its chief weapons was the suicide bomber. The CIA had chosen to ignore all the warning signs. Next, like a pathological virus, the cult spread would become unstoppable.